Shalom. I'm sorry I've been having technical difficulties with my phone. We live the ancient paths. We don't do the modern grid or nothing like that. So we have a little bit of technical difficulties, and we've been having a little bit of warfare over this subject. I'm telling you, it's that important. If you don't believe me, look at the fact that this is probably the third time we've tried to shoot this video. Okay, like I was saying, a lot of people. This is a continuation of the previous. If you watch the first two live streams for today, and it looked like the video cut off, that's because we've been having strong warfare and technical difficulties. So please pay attention. And I don't know how long this live stream is gonna last, so I'm gonna try to cover it. A lot of people are having all these marital issues, business issues, health issues, all kinds of places. It could be water spirits. And I said the other day I was warring, and I heard something say, which I believe was probably the spirit of the Most High, say, these are the spirits which your fathers whored against me. With whom your fathers whored against me, or something along those lines. Okay, so now that I've said that, one of the major focuses of today is going to be Pharmakeia. And I read here in Deuteronomy chapter 18. Let me go back to the important part and get to it again. There shall not be found among you anyone that makes his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that uses divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch. That word witch, or to do witchcraft, is sometimes translated as pharmakeia, pharmakeia, pharmakosa, something along those lines when you're looking at the Greek. And the reason why I want to focus on that, I would usually go with the Hebrew in almost all contexts. However, that translation is so very important for several reasons. One, by the obvious name of it. When we look at that word is translated as witchcraft, and most people wouldn't associate pharmakeia or pharmacy with witchcraft. And so what people don't know is that there's a particular type of witchcraft called sorcery, in which people they manipulate objects, and that can be potions, it can be trinkets, charms, all kinds of stuff like that, which is all wickedness. And some of this that they can do with foods, and they can even do with medicines. There was a particular story that my spouse was telling me about of a book that she was required reading. What was the name of the book?
The Shaman's Apprentice.
Yes, you just heard the name of the title. It's a true book story, right?
Yes, it's nonfiction.
Okay. Nonfiction book about people going down to the Amazon to learn from quote unquote witch doctors as to what plants they should use, and which plants they were using in their drug sorcery or medicinal sorcery to deal with their patients. And these people took these same plants and the knowledge that they learned from them, and took them and turned around and added it to the pharmaceutical industry. And then we hear it again: pharmaceutical, pharmakeia, pharmacy. You also have to know that the Western medical system, they have to agree to an oath, the doctor's oath. I'm not going to say what the name is, but it's called the I'm not going to say it's HERNEUTICAL, oath. Okay, it's after an idol, a Greek idol, if I'm not mistaken. Oh no, I'm sorry, wrong word. It's the HYPOCRATIC. I say it again: HYPOCRATIC, oath. And what that is they're agreeing to a Greek idol's oath, where the Greek idol is basically telling them to if you look it up, you know what they're saying. I'm not going to repeat it, because it's basically a curse and an agreement, basically a covenant they're making with themselves and that idol to do or not to do a thing. Okay? And so medical doctors can choose or not to choose to take that oath. However, that is generally taken in the U.S. and other Western countries. And if you see children, please. And if you see, I'm sorry, I got my family in the car. That's just the way it is. I'm a family man. And we live in the ancient paths. So I'm doing this like this. Okay? So if you see, a lot of times, you see medical offices, drugs, prescription drugs, and stuff like that, other than just RX, standing for prescription, you'll see a staff with 2 snakes going around it and wings. A lot of people try to compare that to Moses' serpent in the wilderness, the Nachesh that the Most High told him to build to heal the people of the fiery serpents that were biting them. However, there are greater problems than that with that symbolism, because that also deals with Hinduism and chakras. Okay, and demonic spirits going up a person's chakras through the spine, which is wickedness. It's totally wicked. Okay, and I'm saying that also for my family, because this is a scripture study also for my family. Okay, when we look at Pharmakeia, what we need to understand, if we look at several of the Hebrew words, did I bring that notepad? Can I see that notepad? If we look at several Hebrew words, you know, there are many different words for different types of witchcraft. Bottom line, there are many different words for many types of witchcraft, but the one I wanted to bring up in particular is, I believe is qasim. Qasim. That word basically that is translated as an observer of times. Okay, basically a diviner. However, this also has multiple other implications. Okay, when we're talking about divining, some people they cut an animal, they look at the entrails and they try to make a sign from it, or they look up in the sky and try to discern by the clouds, and that's actually another word for a type of witch, is an aunin. Okay, and so those are 2 different types, because the word for cloud, one type of cloud is called anin. And so that's also somebody that's basically, how would you say, that's soothsaying and something like that. So it's very similar. However, are doing puffs and magic and spells like that. Okay, children, please. Okay, and so the another thing that I would like to bring up, please excuse me. This is raw. It's not flashy lights and sophisticatedness. I'm a man trying to be used by allowing the Most High to use me and speak by my mouth to feed the sheep. Yah's made me a shepherd, and I'm trying to feed his sheep. Okay.
Stop looking at me.
Okay. So please excuse my children. Okay. Okay. All right. So the reason why I want to focus on this word qasim is because if you look at the root words for qasim, there's 2 other words. The one word is qases, and the other one is qaset, which basically qases is the word I really want to focus on, because it means to strip off or to cut off or to lop off or something like that. It means to basically like to separate. You almost think of a refining process. Another word is cassette, which means like a pot. So you think of these are words, qasim related to cassette. Qasim is basically the diviner that is cutting into, okay, like the flesh of an animal, or you make different things. Cassette being like a pot, and casses meaning to cut off or to strip off. Okay, when you think of all these things together, somebody's taking a pot and they're refining things. They stripping off different details, and this is like how medicine is used. Now, how I'm explaining it may not be the exact application of how these things were used in ancient times. However, Scripture gives us a general idea of how these things can be adapted. Okay, because we didn't have nothing to do with these things, and we weren't even supposed to have any knowledge of these things whatsoever. But these things were common in Egypt and in the surrounding areas, and these words they give you a general understanding of these different practices and how these words could be applied. In Hebrew, you are what you do, and so if the word fits, it can fit several different types of things. However, because those things were so long ago, and many of those types of practices were killed off by King Saul and David and other and the judges. You know, a lot of those the understanding of what these actual words meant is kind of ambiguous. However, there are practices that other pagans keep today that still reflect these words. And so I'm going into the meaning like this because I'm not giving the exact same meanings as, say, a James Strong Concordance or Brown, Drives, and Briggs, or any type of dictionary like that. Okay, and so what I want to talk about heavily today, and it's very important, in which I have somebody with me that's going to speak on that right now, is really sugar, and how sugar is actually a drug, and how sugar has toxic effects on the body and drug-like effects on the body, in which sugar can actually basically dope you or dope a person. And basically it causes a particular type of it's called I'm sorry. It is a particular type of biological compound that's produced in the brain that makes that stimulates pleasure. It's dopamine, okay? And so, thank you. It was on dopamine, and so it causes endorphins. There you go. And it causes endorphins to be dumped into the body, just like if you monitor a drug. You look at sugar intake, you see something similar. So I really want I have somebody with me that's going to speak on this. It's very important about how sugar is actually a drug and can have negative effects on the body. And there's also other types of pharmakeia and sorcery and divination and all that type of stuff I want to talk about to make the people aware that we have absolutely nothing to do with these things. And I'm only talking about these things so that if anybody hears this voice over this video, that if they're involved in any of these practices, that they would immediately repent and leave these things alone. And if any of their family members are doing these things, that they would tell, if Yah leads them to communicate with their family members that these things are wicked and they need to get these practices out of their midst. Because as long as they're doing this, they break the first 2 commands of the 10 commands, which is an automatic for demonic presence in their life and for the evil one to do work in their life and to cause damage. Okay, so before I get there, however, I do want to note that it is very important that, like in Revelation 9:21, it says, "And they did not repent of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their immorality, nor of their thefts." Okay, the word sorceries used here is that pharmakeia in a conjugated form. Okay, and so that's important to realize that it's talking about drug sorcery in its various forms, whether through potions or medicine or sugar and all that. Yahibru. Shalom. Okay, and in Revelation 18:23, "And the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer, and the voice of the bridegroom and bride will be heard in you any longer, for your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery." I do apologize again. Okay. I'm a real person. And I'm warned to try to make sure the people hear this message. I just want to see, like, if you think about that, talk about all the nations, were deceived by her sorceries. Talking about Babylon the Great, and I did have a dream of almost a vision of sorts a couple of years ago, and I believe it was 2015. About I called it the burden of Babylon, just like Isaiah's burden of Babylon, and I recognized Babylon to be America. Okay. And I did put that up online. However, yes, and I know that vision was given by the Most High, because me and my spouse had a dreams. Both had similar dreams the same night. Okay, and so as 2 witnesses about the same subject. So when we talk about sorceries, The U.S. is the one probably the country who made the drugs the biggest. Okay, all kinds of drugs, and then those drugs were then exported around the world. Okay, and then you have other countries getting really big in drugs. I mean, when they found the cocoa plant, start making cocaine and putting in Coca-Cola and all kinds of other drinks like that, which is important for you to understand. And I'm gonna get on that later. They started exporting this stuff around the world, and what you gotta understand, they had to eventually they took that stuff out of the drinks, and it had to be replaced by something, and they found an addictive agent to replace it with, and the addictive agent is sugar. Okay, so I don't know all the ins and outs of the Coca-Cola story. However, I'm not trying to ruin anybody's name or do slander anybody's name. However, that's the truth. Okay, so another thing, when you think about it, they've also spread Western medicine around the world. And we just talked about with Western medicine. That it's spreading around the world. That a lot of the pharmaceutical industry has gotten a lot of these remedies from I'll say a portion of the pharmaceutical industry has gotten these remedies from South American witch doctors, and probably others as well from other places. And so now that I've said some of that stuff, I want somebody I have to talk to you about sugar, in the report. This report on sugar. So you can go ahead, talk about sugar. And they're not going to be on camera.
So, like the brother said, we all know that sugar is addictive. You don't need a scientist to tell you that. And we know that sugar is added to foods so that you are addicted to it. They want you to crave it, because if you crave it, you will seek it out, you will buy it, and they will make money. It's that simple. It's so refined in the food and beverage industry, at least in the West, processed foods, that there's something called the bliss point. And they do research to figure out what is the maximum amount of sugar and fat and salt that they can add to a product to make you crave it and love it, but without it being too sweet or too salty or too fatty. So I'll give you an example. The American Heart Association sets the daily recommended value for sugar for women at 24 grams a day and for men at 36 grams a day. But I can tell you firsthand that these recommendations are not just based on science, and you cannot trust scientists. Scientists try and say that they're impartial, that they're all about research and data, but at the end of the day, you always have to look at who is their funding source. And the vast majority of research is either funded by the U.S. government or by the pharmaceutical companies. So they have agendas. But I can tell you for a fact that much of the daily recommended values for things are not based on what's actually best for people's health. They're political. And for example, I used to work with a man who was the one who testified before Congress when they were setting the daily recommended value for salt. And when he tells the story, he told me, he said, you would never believe who the biggest opposition to the scientifically based sodium levels were. And he said it was actually the beverage industry. The beverage industry fought so hard to have the daily recommended levels of sodium set higher than what the scientists wanted, because it's high in their beverages, that what's currently the recommended value for sodium is not based on health. It was a compromise between what scientists found was healthy and what the beverage industry wanted. So you have to recognize that when they say, oh, we recommend that you have 24 grams of sugar a day, that does not mean that if you eat that amount, it's going to keep you healthy.
Well, you mind to say something?
Please.
Okay, so I just want to comment on that comment. I too much of a lot of stuff is bad. We all know that. However, and balance is great with everything. However, in ancient times, we as a people, we did have salt beds near the Sea of Salt, and which is called the Dead Sea, which the Gentiles call the Dead Sea, but we call the Yem Melech, or modern Hebrew Yam Malach. the Dead Sea, or the Sea of Salt. And so with that Sea of Salt, we have plenty of salt. A lot of people ate plenty of salt. So we got to ask ourselves, if we ate plenty of salt in ancient times, what is the true difference between ancient times and now? If we ate a lot of salt then, but now our people, a lot of Hebrews are getting hypertension and things of that sort, high blood pressure from eating too much salt. Well, if you look up a documentary, there's a news report called "Is Sugar Toxic?" But there's another documentary that's called "The Bitter Truth About Sugar," and there are a number of other documentaries on the same subject. You see that what happens with sugar is, when the body eats too much sugar, the liver processes it and turns it into fat. And then it gets into the bloodstream and travels to sources of fat storage. However, what it will do sometimes is it will dig itself, it will basically lodge itself in the arterial walls, in the walls of the arteries, and it will harden and turn into plaque. And when it hardens and turns into plaque, that actually seems that I personally, I feel like the Most High is giving me a connection that it may be sugar that may be the cause behind hypertension, and salt exacerbates it. Because it's clogging the arteries, it's hardening the arteries with plaque, so that the arteries are no longer have any plasticity, and they can't pump like they do, and the pressure in the blood vessels gets so high. And I'm like, you got to think about, where is this coming from? And when you make the connections, it's high in Hebrews in this country. And when you think about it, what do Hebrews crave? Well, what do sheep crave? What do livestock crave? Sweetness. Livestock, sheep, have a sweet tooth. Look it up online. Sheep, just like cows and goats and other livestock, have a sweet tooth. So Yah's people are sheep. Sheep have a sweet tooth. They crave sweet things. And so what happens is, the Most High's people are craving this the sugar. They eat and eat and eat sugary sweet things. Then what happens, that liver is getting way too much sugar to process, and then what it does is it turns it into fat. It lodges itself in the arterial walls. Now you got plaque, and then people are not understanding where it's coming from. And then they start dealing with hypertension, then it's a stroke. They start dealing with congestive heart failure and all these other things. In my personal opinion, and I'm not the biggest expert in the world, okay? I don't have any degree in any type of Western medicine. I'm not a medical doctor. This is my personal opinion, due to research that happened to include medical doctors. However, and I don't care much about their opinion. However, I think the problem is sugar, and I think this is important when we talk about sugar. I mentioned the word qasim, which basically dealt with a type of soothsayer, but also that it was related to the words qaset and the words qases. Qases, to cut off or to lop off. To basically, when you think about a qaset, a pot, or some sort of vessel, you think about cooking, and refining and cutting off all the ingredients. I think the true meaning of a pharmakeia in this circumstance with sugar, this is, I would say the meaning behind it, to a degree. For particular situations, there are also other applications that would equally apply. Is that when somebody strips something, cuts everything off, strips everything off of something except for like one basic compound, so that compound becomes mind altering, soul altering, alters their spirit, alters their body in a negative fashion, or in a wicked fashion, like causing hallucinations, causing trips, like acid trips, like people taking shrooms and seeing all kinds of stuff, which probably are not hallucinations. Okay, a psychiatrist, they will tell you all kinds of stuff because they deny the spiritual. Okay, and so when you think about all that stuff, pharmakeia is when you take out of all the whole food compounds and basically refines something so much into its only one biological compound, a biochemical compound, that can actually affect the body in very powerful ways, like opioids. Okay, sugar would be one of them. Okay, people say, well, brown sugar is okay. Well, I wouldn't even agree with brown sugar. I would agree with cane juice, raw cane juice, molasses, and stuff like that. You know, dates are okay. Honey is okay. But what happens is they strip everything else away to is just the sugar. And then with sugar, they strip everything back, and then they add molasses back to it, and then it becomes brown sugar, cane sugar. Depending on what they're doing or who's making it or which company it is. They have light brown and dark brown. It's just molasses added back for the most part. And it's crystalline sugar. Crystalline sugar, processed crystalline sugar is the problem in this case. So I'm going to let this person continue talking.
So I think the brother hit on a couple of really good points. First, most of us know that the drug opium is derived from poppy, the poppy plant. And there's nothing wrong with eating poppy seeds. If you have a poppy seed bagel or a poppy seed muffin, preferably you're making it yourself, because those prepackaged items have toxins in them. But there's nothing wrong with consuming poppy seeds in your food. Why? Because it's a whole food. And Yah knew what he was doing when he made the whole food. But when you derive just the opium out of the poppy, that's when it becomes harmful. That's when it becomes mind-altering. And that's when it can really negatively affect your mind and your body and your spirit. It's the same thing with sugar. In its context, in a whole food, Yah designed it to operate. He didn't design it to be isolated and synthesized and to work on its own. We can give you an example. We know that fiber slows the absorption of sugar. So if you're eating sugar at a natural source, take dates for example. Dates are extremely sweet. However, dates are also extremely fibrous, which means you're not going to get the huge spike in insulin levels, which insulin is used to help you process the sugar, that you would if you ate pure sugar, because the fiber is going to slow the absorption. Yahuwah knew what he was doing when he put it in a food. And scientists are extremely prideful. They think that they can figure out all the ways and hows and the dark ways of Yahuwah when he designed food, but they cannot understand how all these different factors that Yah put into one food work together. Even if they can isolate every compound of a food, which they can't, but even if they could, they have no understanding of how the multiple compounds together work towards your health. So isolating one is to really negate the fact that that Yah is more complicated than that. And the brother also talked about the liver. And I think he's onto something there. If you delve into the scientific literature, it's already known that eating added sugars are associated with asthma, obesity, high blood pressure, and altered lipid profiles. Now, when I say altered lipid profiles, lipid is a type of fat. So most people have heard of HDL and LDL and know them as good and bad cholesterol, respectively, which, by the way, scientists have no idea what makes them good and which makes them bad. It's just an association. But that's what I mean by altered lipid profiles. So that could surely lead to plaque formation and things like the brother was talking about. So I think he was onto something. But he talked about the liver. The liver is an extremely important organ. The liver is the main organ that processes sugar and that stores sugar in your body. If you have a lot of glucose, which is one form of simple sugar, it is stored in the liver as glycogen. The liver has lots of other jobs to do, though. So if the liver is sitting there having to spend all its time focusing on processing sugar, it cannot correctly create the HDL and the LDL, which are manufactured in the liver.
Wait, hold on. HDL is what?
HDL stands for high density lipoprotein, and LDL stands for low density lipoprotein.
And commonly known as what?
HDL is known as good cholesterol, and LDL is known as bad cholesterol. For those of you who actually still go to Western doctors, when you get your checkups and they give you your charts, they always have your HDL and LDL levels. Most of you don't know what it stands for. That's why I just used the acronym. But thank you for making me pause there. Both of those are manufactured in and processed in the liver. Toxins are also dealt with in the liver. If you've heard of glutathione, for example, glutathione is a very important antioxidant that is used when your body finds a toxin. It flags the toxin saying, hey, this is not good for us, we need to get it out with glutathione, and it's able to excrete it from your body. This is all done in the liver, amongst other things. If your liver is overwhelmed with having to process sugar, it cannot dedicate as many resources towards those other very important aspects of its job. And toxicity is something that we're all exposed through, unfortunately, through the air, through the water, through the food. And that's a whole nother segment in itself. But if your liver in particular is so focused on sugar, it's not going to be able to effectively filter out toxins. And so there's lots of scientific papers, but the average person doesn't understand the jargon or the very specific words that are used in scientific papers. However, there was a CNN report that came out on November 14th that is entitled, Nearly All Toddlers and the Majority of Babies Eat Too Much Added Sugar in the U.S. Now, why is this important?
Here's the meat.
This study is put in layman's terms. They read the article, the scientific paper, and put it into normal terms. And why do we care about babies? Well, first of all, we know that children have a special place in Yah's heart. But throwing the little children off the righteous path is a serious offense. But in addition to that, we know that eating behaviors for life are established in the first 5 years of a child's life. If a child is exposed to added sugars in the first 5 years, they are much more likely to consume soda and candy and all these other extremely sugar-filled so-called foods as they get older. Okay, so one thing we're talking about here is added sugar. That means that they have taken a plant like sugarcane, they have extracted the sugar molecules, and most of the time turned them into those white or brown crystals that people add to their food and beverages.
Crystalline sugar, such as white sugar, brown and light sugar, and possibly cane sugar as well.
Yeah, so the added sugar, these are any sweeteners that are not normally found in food. If it's a sugar that is still in the context of the whole food like Yah created, that is a Yah created sugar in its context. That is not added sugar.
Hold on, and just one moment, if I may.
Go ahead.
Okay, so when we talk about sugar, you got to realize that these people can be extremely deceptive. And they know what they're putting in, but to get around the public, they will give things alternate names, or use alternate or scientific names, or synonymous names and items so to get around them. Like cochineal bug, which is not kosher for any person, which is usually used in red dyes for clothing. Very expensive red dyes, just like Kermes beetles. Cochineal is even more was known to be more expensive than Kermes beetle for red dye production. They use it in food, and they will call cochineal beetle in food several names. What can you think of a name? Okay, I have to put that in the box. But they will call cochineal beetles by several names. And you will not. Actually, I have y'all research that. Look it up. And what is cochineal beetle called in food, because it's used as a red dye, especially in or when it comes to beaver butt. Basically, that will be as a natural flavor in raspberry. When it comes to sugars, yes, there's an anal gland in a beaver that they use for raspberry flavor. Some of you probably already know that. When it comes to sugars, they will use sugars such as sucrose. Sucralose, glucose, dextrose, among several others. So you got to look up all the alternate names for sugars. Can you think of any?
Maltose, sorbitol. So like the
maltitol.
If it scientifically, if you see something that ends in ose, O-S-E, it is a sugar.
And what about the tols, alls?
The alls,
sugar alcohols,
sugar
right?
Alcohols.
That's right. Yeah. Sugar alcohols.
Maltitol, sorbitol, erythritol. That's all I can think of at the moment, but there are lots of them. And so, you mind if I get back to the article? So this article is important. Why? Because we have have to establish good eating habits in our children, and we do not want to be exposing our children to pharmakeia. And we have all witnessed a child who has had too much sugar, and the response that they have, they literally act like they are on drugs. They literally go through withdrawal symptoms like they are on drugs. So for all of you who may be questioning...
I want to... May I?
Go ahead.
Again, I'm sorry. I noticed this with my own children after giving them what I thought was good ice cream with simple ingredients. And the Most High convicted me on it. When I had seen drug addicts before, somebody on a particular drug, cocaine or something, or do something weird and rubbing their lips and doing all something. And if you really look at a child that's on a